African Union expels Israel's envoy from a session on the Rwanda genocide. Tensions flare over Palestine, colonial legacies, and who gets to speak on the world stage. The EU's move has drawn fierce reactions from Hamas, hailing it as a courageous stance to Israel, calling it an anti-political act. But beneath the headlines, bigger questions loom. Why does this keep happening? Is the AU taking a principled stand against occupation, one that it was expected for a very, very long time? Or is this geopolitical maneuvering at play? What does it say about Africa's role in global solidarity movements? To help us unpack this diplomatic firestorm that we are closing the show with today is Faisal Ali, journalist at The Guardian and also contributing editor at Geeska. Faisal, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to Salam Media. Really, really appreciate you giving us your time and looking forward to an eye-opening, insightful conversation.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I think we can just kickstart the conversation with the context. You know, a lot has been said or has been said to have happened when it comes to, what happened at the AU. Obviously, the AU says Israel's ambassador was unexpected, but yet you have Ethiopia coming out and claiming, well, he was invited. Who's telling the truth here, and why is there such confusion over protocol and having that Israeli envoy at the African Union?
It really is hard to say, and this isn't basically the first time this has ever happened. So in 2023, there's that kind of famous video of Sharilon, the former Israeli ambassador to Ethiopia, being hauled out of the African Union main assembly hall. Afterwards, there were questions about why and how that could happen, how there could be confusion. The African Union was saying that Israel was given a non-transferable invitation as an observer state to kind of come and participate in that capacity at the event. Afterwards, there were kind of different types of claims about what was going on. I really don't know what drives the kind of different voices on some of these issues, but it's obviously important to kind of closely read those countries which oppose Israel's presence at some of these events. What we do know for sure is that obviously Mohammed Yusuf has taken over the African Union. Israel alleges that it was on his initiative that they were removed from it, and we know also that he has quite a strong position on solidarity with Palestine. He's a Djiboutian former foreign minister. He spoke, and his government has spoke quite strongly. I mean, in terms of capacity to do something about it, obviously they're much more limited. I think this is a country with about 800,000 citizens, effectively just kind of one city. But in any case, he's been vocal, and part of his election campaign to even become the African Union chair had a lot to do with his position on Palestine, which is, according to the Africa Report website, one of the reasons why Kenya wasn't viewed favorably by a lot of African countries was because of the fact that they were viewed to be quite weak. And as you said, I think African countries take seriously at least vocal diplomatic and political solidarity with Palestine, going right the way back to the Organization of African Unity, and then largely through today. I mean, it's ebbed and flowed at periods, but basically the majority of countries in the African Union recognize Palestine, for example. I think bar Cameroon or Malawi or one or two countries here and there. So I think that kind of speaks to the politics of the African Union on the Israel Palestine issue.
You mentioned that this is not the first time that this kind of thing has happened. The AU suspended Israel's observer status in 2023, and this was obviously over this genocide over Palestine. Does this latest move signal that the bloc is hardening its stance, or is this just symbolic politics? Because when you look at almost all of the countries that claim to recognize and are in solidarity with Palestine, most of them still have, Israeli missions in their countries. Even South Africa here, we still haven't officially closed our Israeli embassy. So how much of it could be political posturing, or is it a start of signals of that hardening, where literal steps when it comes to cutting ties with Israel could ultimately be seen?
So look, I would definitely say that it's hard to speak about Africa as a block of like there's 57 or so countries, sorry, 50 odd countries. And then in addition to that, there are some countries which are more concerned about this issue for obvious reasons. Egypt, this is a major problem for Egypt. It's happening on the Egyptian border. People have not been satisfied with the measures that the Egyptian government has taken so far, but obviously for them, it's also, in addition to being a moral, political, and issue to do with like a fraternal people, it is also a security issue. The Egyptian public obviously is kind of riling, and people can kind of see like simmering in Egyptian cities, activists kind of blowing off on Twitter and elsewhere, podcasts. Even bands are making music about this issue. Tilka Qadeh was one of the really famous ones, which was kind of considered song of divorce with the West. We're kind of disgusted in many ways. On the point about whether this is posturing or whether we can look forward to something more, it will depend. I mean, Netanyahu, last year, you'll remember in August, he visited Kenya, Uganda, and Rwanda, and those countries had no problem hosting an Israeli leader. Not even the president; it was the prime minister. So he's the one who's in control of the government and is executing the policies which we're very concerned about elsewhere around the world, in spite of everything that's going on. Right? I don't think that could happen. Obviously, in the kind of OIC member states, which are in Africa, where that's kind of more complicated, the politics around that, and then doubly so in the Arab League countries, which are in Africa. There are, I think, 10 or so states, from Somalia all the way across to Mauritania. I don't imagine an Israeli prime minister would be granted a reception in any of those places. But when I think about this a little, I kind of think about what capacity these countries have. So I think it's important, as you say, a lot of people would like to see ties cut, for example, if there's any trade happening, for that to be stopped. We're not talking about a kind of flare-up of rocket exchange and F-35s occasionally bombing. We're talking about Israel being investigated at present for actually committing a genocide. And I think all of the experts on genocide basically have come out and said, what they've seen is completely consistent with the pattern of behavior in Rwanda in the past, in Bosnia in the past, and of course, elsewhere. And so I don't know if this will translate in all countries into a kind of stronger position, but obviously we're certain that the African Union, over the course of the last year, because of a lot of leading African member states like South Africa, like Namibia, like Egypt, like Algeria, have made this issue their own. Obviously, famously, the Palestinian ambassador to South Africa said that African countries view Palestine as an African issue. It's kind of extra continental. It's over there. We just have a view on it, and it's a strong view. No, it's quite close to heart. I spoke to Ibrahim Rasool, the ambassador to the US, who was recently returned to South Africa about last year as well. And he said, as people who have been colonized, when we look at Palestine, that's the lens through which we see this issue. And so this isn't, it's intimate, let me just put it that way, for a lot of African countries, a lot of African leaders, and definitely the publics, which is why we've even had to discuss this issue in the first place. It's a big deal.
Definitely. One thing that was really, really interesting for me was Ethiopia, which is, the host of the African Union, publicly coming out and condemning the expulsion of that Israeli envoy. What can we make of this? Is there more to read from this? Is there a rift between, AU member states, or is, Addis Ababa under pressure from some of its Western allies?
Ethiopia's relationship with its Western allies has been strained since it executed a really brutal war in Tigray. But historically, Ethiopia has had very close relations with Israel and has sought to kind of maintain and bolster and grow those relations, despite the fact that we've seen awful suffering in Gaza over the last year. And so, in response to your question, I think I would have expected them to say something like that, basically. It doesn't surprise me. In reality, when they're kind of speaking to the public, they attempt to depict themselves as like a neutral actor, somebody which can speak to all parties. I know the Palestinian side appreciates that on the behalf of Ethiopia. They don't view them necessarily as a very hostile, pro Israel's state in the same way that they view Kenya, for example, or Uganda every now and again. And I think we should put that kind of those remarks in that context. Basically, what we're not sure is if Avram Negus was invited. Why was he then kicked out? Do you see what I mean? That's a really bizarre way to. I don't get why anybody would do that. If you had a problem with it in the first place, surely you would check that. So it's either that they didn't know he was coming, some of the people who attended the event, and then discovered that he was there, or as you say, the protocol wasn't communicated around to all the relevant factors, but all the relevant attendees. Sorry, but I don't want to speculate on that because it's hard. It's going to be hard to ever find that out. I think some really diligent reporter in Addis Ababa is going to have to look into that for us.
No, definitely. I think we're going to on that note, Faisal. Thank you so much for joining us and giving us the time. Really, really appreciate it. And looking forward to chatting to you again in the not so distant future.
Take care. Bye-bye.
There you go. Faisal Ali comes to us live from London out in the UK. He's a journalist with The Guardian. And I think really great way to finish off the show. Again, the fiery debate on Africa, the continent's focus and how we approach this genocide and, the diplomacy, morality, and just the weight of history all colliding in one, as Faisal there alluded to the fact that we see what's happening in Israel through the lens of our history and what happened to Africa and how the state of the continent is currently. So it's an African issue. It's internalized, and I think interesting stance there taken by the AU, but really concerned by some of the African countries. Ethiopia, for instance, condemning this action, and one can only think, imagine, speculate what that decision could be attributed to. Is it pressure from some of their Western allies? Is it pressure from Israel itself and the relationship that they've had with those colonizers in recent years? So it'll be interesting to see how Africa continues to grapple with this issue while also trying to drive this balancing act between what's happening internally on the continent, because there's a lot happening right here at home that needs focus and attention, and balancing what's happening in Palestine, because that issue is very, very important, and I think it's top of the list when it comes to a lot of African countries, particularly us here in South Africa. It'll be interesting how the AU continues to deal with Israel, to deal with its role on the continent, and how we kind of maneuver the diplomatic ties that we have with them. So very, very interesting discussion to close off the show. Hope that you enjoyed being with us for the past 2 and half hours or so. I'll be with you again next week, Tuesday, for the Tuesday edition of News and Views. Tomorrow, Inait Wadi comes back for the Juma edition of the show. It's been a great one. It's been an interesting one, and hope to see you again in the not so distant future. We'll see you again next week, but keep locked into Salam Media as we bring you the latest in and the world around you. Assalamu alaikum. Shap. Thank you to everyone that watched, everyone that made the show possible. If you missed any of the discussions, if you missed any of the interviews, you can head out to our social media platforms at Salam Media. You can head out to our website, www.salammedia.com, and you can get all the updates. But for now, it's goodbye. Shap.